Okay, well, good afternoon, folks, and welcome again to the overview of Chapter 115 changes. It's good to be here with you. My name is Angel Loredo. I'm the Director of Higher Education Educator Support Services with the Maine Department of Education. And it's a great pleasure to be here with you and seeing a lot of friendly faces on my right. And today we have two stellar presenters who will be guiding you through some of these changes as we go forward into 115. Please note this is being recorded. And at the same time, it should be on the website tomorrow once we upload it, and for those folks who weren't able to be here. So with that, I'm going to introduce our two speakers for this evening. The first is the Certification Chief and Colby Hall of Famer in softball, that's Ms. Stephanie Fife. And then with us today, we're very happy to have our Deputy Commissioner, who is a former Spanish and science teacher. So we're happy to have him with us today, and he's going to share his knowledge of 115 as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to my learned friend, Stephanie Fife.
Hi, everyone. And Beth, it's so nice to see you. We were just trading emails, so that's wonderful. So thank you all for being here. It's really important to understand this information as we move forward. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule. As you can see here, we did have a webinar on May 18th, so last Wednesday. Basically, that was talking a lot about the legislative process and the people involved and how we got to this point. The recording and PowerPoint for that are posted on the website. So if you would like to take a look, it is there for you to take a look at. Today is May 25th, so we are obviously doing the overview of Chapter 115 changes. As Angel said, that will be posted tomorrow as well. And then a little plug for our last of three webinar series is on June 8th. And that one is designed for support chairs, but anyone is welcome to come. It's on how to best support educators through this certification process. So without further ado, we will go ahead and get started. The agenda for today, we're going to talk a little bit about who is impacted by rule change. We're going to talk a little bit about how do the changes impact educators differently. That's a little complicated, so I'm glad that you're all here to hear it firsthand. When will this impact the field, and what are the highlighted changes? So feel free to post questions in the chat as we go. Raise your hand if you'd like to interject with a question. Angel is keeping an eye on that, and we'll make sure that we get your questions answered promptly. So the first question, how do the changes in the rule impact renewals? We've had a lot of teachers, educators in general, who are a little anxious anytime new rules go into effect because they don't know what this means for them. So I want to reiterate one more time, actually, that's not true. It's going to be every day for a while, but that's okay. What you have, you will always keep. Okay, so whoever has the certificate that they have, as long as they are renewing it in a timely fashion, that will never be gone. Even if we get rid of a particular endorsement, that particular educator can always keep that endorsement as long as they renew it. So as you may be talking to other people who have a little bit of anxiety about that, please, feel free to put them at ease. No one's taking anything away. That said, please make sure that they are never letting their certificate lapse. That's the critical key there. Make sure that it's renewed on time. And then just a reminder that the renewal requirements are 45 contact hours or 3 semester hours for ed techs, 90 contact hours or 6 semester hours for teachers or specialists, and 90 contact hours or semester hours for admins. And I'm going to put a little star there with a disclaimer saying this is most of them. There are some nuances. For example, school psychologist is very different. So in general, we can go by that, but there are always a few nuances. So that's my disclaimer. And then For the admin renewal, one of the things that you'll learn today is that in these new rules, the admin renewal is going to change a little bit, where it's no longer going to be progressive requirements, where you're required to do the necessary tasks to move to the next level of certification. So you'll learn a little bit more about that today. But this is actually a really big deal because a lot of people call and email with fear. They're very fearful. So you guys are okay with this information. We can share this information. No one's losing anything, just renew in time, right? Okay. All right, thank you. That is much appreciated. Dan, do you let me turn this one over to you?
No, go ahead. Keep going. You're doing a good job.
Okay,
we'll tag
great.
team if we need to, but
Okay,
you do
perfect.
great.
Well, fill it in if I miss stuff. So in 1189, we discussed this in the first webinar. There are implications to 115 from 1189. One of which is that not everyone is bound to the new regulations that will be going into effect shortly. So in 5 instances, there are people that do not need to be bound to the new regulations. Those are found in statute in 13006. If any of you love to Google those sorts of things, I actually know some of you you actually do that. So here are some examples. So those educators who held an active certificate during the 21-22 school year. So this would be people who have professional certificates, waiver certificates, conditional certificates, emergency certificates. They already know what they're supposed to work on. They were evaluated under old rule. They have their evaluation letter that they're working on, checking off those boxes. They do not need to worry about now having to worry about a whole new set of regulations. Okay, so there's been a little bit of anxiety about that, people calling in, and I don't know what to do. Just take a look at your evaluation letter. The next group of people is that a person who was enrolled or completed an EPP program and hence received a recommendation for them. As long as they were in the 21-22 school year, this school year that's ending now, that already ended for college, they also can abide by the old/current regulations. So an example of this would be incoming freshmen to those EPP programs and others who join the program later in their educational pathway. Those students would be subject to the new regulations. And then we also have a significant group of people who applied for an endorsement under the old regulations, but were never issued anything, right? So they have their letter, they may be working on a conditional or they don't want a conditional, so they're working on the list to get a professional, whatever their particular situation may be, they can continue with the evaluation letter that they have. That said, if they would like to be reevaluated under the new rules, then we absolutely can do that too. So we will work closely with them so they understand the benefits, because every situation is a little different. So we want to make sure that we're working with them to find the least resistance for each individual person. So those are 3 very different things. Did I miss anything, Dan? Anything you'd like to add?
No, and just to be very clear with everyone, because we were just about renewals a second ago, these are obviously initial applications or a new application for a new certificate that we're talking about here. And even though in 13006-A there are 5 instances, we've kind of smooshed them together a little bit for efficiency on the slide. So so these folks, according to a law that was passed last summer, are able to choose which set of rules they can follow.
Mm-hmm. And to elaborate a little bit on that, here very clearly is an example of how the rules can be influenced by other things, like 1186, right? So what we're trying to do, and you all know that we have PDFs on our website for every individual endorsement to try to help make sense of this. We are right now creating new support documents for every endorsement that ties in 1189 into this piece. So hopefully those will really help provide some clarity and some direction for people. So we're hoping that that's a really nice resource for everyone. All right, into the next slide. So when does this start? We had previously reported out June 11th, but this is a correction. These new rules will begin on June 10th. So applications submitted June 10th and after will be evaluated with the new rules in place. Applications submitted prior to will be evaluated with the old rules. And then of course, I already put my little plug in there for the support documents, but we are really excited to provide that to people to help provide some clarity, because it does get a little complicated. But that said, we have a lot of flexibility to work with people and try to get them what they need.
And of course, any of the individuals who qualify for being able to choose the rule on the previous slide could choose the old one or the new one.
Right.
If they don't
So,
qualify for one of those, then the June 10th is the date.
Not to confuse anybody.
we're here for you. So, all right, moving along, I'm going to turn this over to Deputy Commissioner Shuda.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. And we only have 368 slides to go over the changes that are in the rules. So I hope you have dinner all ready to go while we go through the slides. So this slide highlights some of the bigger changes that are in the rule. And some of these you may already know about because some of them were instituted with this now infamous LD 1189 that became law last year. But probably the biggest highlight is the removal of praxis being a requirement for certificates. I'll talk a little bit more about how praxis still can be part of someone's application, but the group, and this gets back to last session's kind of the journey that we took to get to a new rule, but the consensus-based rulemaking committee, which was the group that convened initially to start looking at this, really looked hard at both the pros and cons of utilizing praxis, and in the end made the proposal to remove that requirement. So that's one piece. We looked closely at grade spans, and this is something that you're going to want to look at carefully because not all grade spans start with pre-K. Some do now, some do not. And so it will be important to take a look at grade span implications. And we'll also address, for instance, if you are an art teacher and you're certified K-12 and you'd like to have a pre-K to 12 certificate, I believe Stephanie will address what has to happen with that in a little bit as well. There were a number of updates in language related to professional standards. So for instance, the administrative professional standards were the ones that were referenced in the rule previously were outdated. And so those are updated, and there's a couple different instances of that throughout the new rules. There are 2 new course requirements, 3 semester hours each for, put succinctly, human development. We get into a little bit more specific about what that is in just a couple minutes, as well as diversity. So for just about every teaching certificate and endorsement, there are 2 new requirements for those. There's quite a bit more flexibility built into lots of different pathways, including career and technical education, CTE, looked for some increased flexibility as far as what was expected for those certificates. So those are just a few of the highlights. We'll get into a little bit more detail as we proceed through here. By the way, we're going to just proceed through with the information, but if you have questions, we'll certainly try to address those at the end. If you would like to pop those in the chat, I'm assuming, Stephanie, folks have access to the chat. Is that true? Okay. If you want to, as they come to you, pop those in the chat. We'll just revisit those, and then we won't miss those. We won't answer them right away, but at least if something comes to mind and you want us to answer it later, feel free to pop that in the chat if that works for you. Okay, so as many of you know, Chapter 115 has two parts, Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 has some general requirements and other pieces as well, but some general requirements. And then Part 2 goes certificate by certificate, endorsement by endorsement, for very specific requirements for each. So there were changes in both parts, Part 1 and Part 2. And by the way, I can't remember, Stephanie, if you mentioned this already, but they have been posted on the Secretary of State's page. So those are good to go as of earlier today. So the Chapter 115 documents that are now posted are actually the new ones, which is good. So a couple changes, just to highlight a few. In Part 1 includes changes to out-of-state licensure applying for a professional certificate. This was born out of some of our emergency situations with credentialing folks from out of state. So that has been added to Part 1. In similar fashion, there is now what's called an emergency educational technician certificate, as well as an emergency teacher certificate. Those expectations and requirements for those two roles are now in Part 1. You can look those up. There was the addition of an alternative education teacher requirement, or requirements for an alternative education teacher. Essentially, it says that you have to be fingerprinted and hold a certificate in something in order to be an alternative education teacher. And finally, there were clarifications in the local credentialing committee language. Those are the support groups that are at SAU levels to help people renew, and some of the language has been updated in its Section 9 of Part 1 for LCCs. Okay, so now we'll dive into Part 2. So I mentioned previously that the requirement for folks to take a praxis has been removed. That, of course, was not the only requirement that there ever was for any of the certificates. So wherever it used to say pass a qualifying examination, it will now have language that looks something like this, which is that in order to meet that expectation, someone could take the basic skills test in reading, writing, and mathematics, which is an option for folks. But if they choose not to, they could submit on a transcript, which most of these folks are doing anyway, indication that they have achieved at least a 3.0 cumulative GPA in all the courses required for the certification. So those of you familiar with 115 already know that it lists which courses are expected for that endorsement certificate. There would need to be a 3.0 cumulative GPA for those courses required for that certification in order to fulfill that expectation. Or an applicant may, again, for this one particular requirement, submit to the department a portfolio through the Maya system, and that will be reviewed to see that someone has fulfilled or has provided evidence that they have met the initial teacher standards, of which there are 11. And there's actually a checklist for which on the certification page that shows which performance indicators in particular we're looking for as far as evidence. In addition, I mentioned as one of the highlights that there are 2 new course requirements for just about all teaching certificates and some of the ed specialists as well. Those include 3 semester hours of diversity-centered content related to today's classroom, and there are a couple examples parenthetically in the rule that provide some sense of what some of those courses could be. Similarly, there's a 3 semester hours of human or child development or educational or developmental psychology expectation, and again, parenthetically, some examples of what those courses could be to fulfill those requirements. One of the frequently asked questions that comes up about this is that if a course included some of this but was not necessarily all about diversity in the classroom, for instance, could that count? And the answer to which is no. It really needs to be a course that is focused on these two new areas. So as Stephanie's evaluators go through transcripts, they're going to be looking for courses that are specifically focused on these two areas. I noticed that there's two questions that were just posted related to praxis in particular, so I think I'll just answer those now to make sure that there's clarification. So the first is, what's the basic skills test? And that's the praxis one. And is the praxis 2 required? No. Okay. Professional standards, as I mentioned, for 071, 075, and administrators. You'll see new references to those. There are 2 new endorsements, the American Sign Language, the 454, and the health and physical education is actually a combined endorsement now. It doesn't replace the standalone health and it doesn't replace the standalone PE, but there's a third one now. If someone wishes to apply for that, that would be a combined health and PE. The elementary teacher 020, the grade span has changed from currently K8, it will be K6. And there's additional 3 semester hours in literacy. You'll want to watch that carefully because there's actually a change in how those were constituted. They were broken out and they've been rearranged a little bit, but there is an additional 3 semester hours for literacy in the 020. Social studies at 200 now can include psychology and sociology as allowable content areas for filling some of the social studies requirements. World language, there are additional options available, including some standardized assessments that were not previously utilized. World languages, by the way, is one of the unique areas in which the commissioner and the state board can work together to add additional languages. So if in the course of instruction there is some interest in adding another language to the list, the state board and commissioner can work together to add that without having to go through the entire rulemaking process. English for speakers of other languages, that's an updated title, by the way, for the 660 endorsement. And there is an additional pathway and clarity of requirements for 660. Pre-K has been added to many certificates and endorsements, as I mentioned, but not all. So you just want to look carefully at what the new grade span is. And finally, on this screen, changes to the Teacher of Children with Disabilities certificate, the 282. So this one, there's a couple different things that happen here. First of all, the birth to, as some of you may know, there are different grade spans or age spans that are possible for the 282. The birth to 5 now has the requirement for 3 semester hours in a coursework related to teaching children with disabilities. The student teaching setting was also added for the birth to 5, that it could be in a birth to 5 setting. No surprises there. In general, the 282 requirements, there are more specific areas that must be met in order to fulfill the 282 requirements. There still is a level of flexibility beyond those, but there was interest in having at least a basic set of expectations for some of the courses. And this was, again, born out of the consensus-based rulemaking committee that there's a new conditional certificate pathway for EdTech 3s to be working towards that 282. So there may be of interest for some folks that are currently EdTech 3s that may want to work towards the 282, and there's now a new conditional pathway for that. Okay, school psychologist certificate had basically a almost complete rewrite. we worked with their association on those updates, and so those are indicated in the new rule. In the career and technical education section, first of all, there used to be a mismatch between which endorsements were available and which programs were available in schools. And language was added to say whatever the approved programs are for schools listed on the department's website, those are the available endorsements for people. So there's a match there. And there's new flexibility that actually was somewhat challenging for certified teachers to become CTE instructors. And so some additional flexibility has been made for current certified teachers to become instructors if they wish. There were almost a handful, 4 endorsements removed: the special education consultant, the speech and language clinician, and then 2 CTE certificates, or maybe they were endorsements, were also removed. And I will say that as far as the 3 special education related, the 079, the 865, and the 094, there was concerns that the roles in which certified special educators and related services fulfill overlapped, and these may not be appropriately qualified to perform the roles that were here. So the decision was made to remove the 79, 865, and 094. As far as the speech and language clinician, those folks are required to be licensed as well, and similar to other certificates where they were licensed, the speech and language clinicians also need to be certified. So now they will be similar to their colleagues in which they just need to be licensed.
All right, this is back to me. So frequently asked questions. As you would probably anticipate, we are already receiving a lot of emails and phone calls asking questions. So I met with the team to make sure that I was addressing some of those here to help proactively as much as we could. So one of the big questions is, where can I find the new rules? So thank you for telling me that they are on the Secretary of State site. So if you go to our DOE website on any page and you scroll down to the footer at the bottom, there are a ton of resources there in the footer. And on the very far right of the footer, there are links to all kinds of great things. One of them says DOE rule chapters. You click on that link, you will see all of the DOE rule chapters, including, of course, 115, part 1 and part 2. And because it's been updated, that means you can access the new regulations now. Yay, so you might be curious to see exactly how this all works. Okay, another really popular question. How can I get my current endorsement switched to new grade levels? I suspect that this is going to be a very popular question, particularly with the content areas, as the grade levels are switching from 7 to 12 to 6 to 12. So essentially, whoever has like a 7 to, so for example, I have a professional English certificate that is 7 to 12. As long as I continue to renew that, I will always have a 7 through 12 certificate and only have to continue with the renewal requirements. If I would like to then also add the 100 that takes me to 6 to 12, I need to apply for the endorsement again. But the catch here is that I would have to follow the new regulation. So anything that I didn't have in the new regulations, I would have to meet those expectations. So,
yeah, so it's got some.
Oh, thank you. So because I know the English pretty well, I would know that the diversity requirement would be a requirement for me, as well as the educational psychology. Because I went to an EPP program, I'm pretty sure I already have those on my transcript, but that is something that I would want to take into consideration if I would like to apply for that endorsement. Okay, next very popular question. When will the new PDFs be available? We are working on them as we speak. The plan is to upload them all on the 9th, June 9th, because the new rules go into effect on the 10th. And anyone who's applying prior to the 10th is still falling under old regulations, so we don't want to cause more confusion than we need to. That said, it also gives us time to try to make sure that they are all done and double and triple checked, and we can put them all on at the same time. So mark your calendars. I have it on mine for the 9th, and we're going to be putting them all on. When do the new rules start? Another popular question, as we went over, but it's really key, the 10th. That is the key. June 10th is when the new rules go into effect. Another question that the team was telling me is we're getting a lot of questions about how do these new rules help me personally? So the challenge with this is, as you all know, everyone's individual situation is incredibly different. And so there is risk in telling someone blanket items that may or may not apply to them. So if someone is asking very specifically about them, we are happy to help and guide them along. So please, everyone wants to help, and I want everyone to help, but just be very careful about when they're asking really nuanced pieces, because the last thing we want is someone to go take a course or apply for something that wouldn't have helped them. And we just want to really avoid anyone spending money that they don't need to, or time in terms of coursework or other things that they need. So if it's nuanced, please reach out to us. We are happy to help navigate that. Of course, we have the phone line, as we know. We have that staffed all the time. However, there's only so many of us, and there's tens of thousands of educators. So when 20 people call at once, there is a wait, as much as we try not to. So more than happy to call us and we will help you, but a lot of times emailing us at cert.doe@maine.gov is the quickest way to get a hold of us. We have, the entire team actually has access to that email hub. And so we have multiple people working on that throughout the day to make sure people are getting the answers. Oh, that was it. Before I move to the next slide, are there any other burning questions from the group?
So there's a few, Stephanie. I think we'll go with the chat first. But
okay, perfect. I can't see the chat because I'm sharing. Yep. So if you guys can help. Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Start off.
The other thing I was going to say, Angel, before we get going with the questions, is that if people do have on-the-spot questions, if you could raise your Zoom hand, that will be helpful, because it's hard to see everybody across the screen. So let's start with the chat ones, and then we'll go to Zoom hands.
I think we answered Keely Blake's, is practice one needed? Then Jane Waxman asks, what is the appeal process for credentialing requirements?
The appeal process for credentialing departments. Do you mean like if someone has an evaluation letter and they think that they meet a requirement that we didn't give them credit for?
Hi, that's me. I have an unusual situation, and I've been asked to fulfill what feels like a very, very large number of units. And I keep on writing letters asking, what can I do? Who can I talk to? And I haven't really gotten any response.
Jane, I'm still not sure I understand your question. Fulfilling units for
so
what?
I don't want to take up oxygen about my specific situation, but I just moved here from California, and I have kind of an unusual situation where I've been hired as a teacher, and I'm being asked to start from scratch. I've been teaching for 30 years, and I'm literally being asked to start from scratch.
Okay.
Oh.
So what we'll do, Jane, is I've written your name down, and I don't think we would have too many Jane Waxmans in our systems. You should be easy to find. So what I'll do in the morning is I'll get with our evaluators and pull you up and take a look at what the situation is, what we can and can't do. What I can tell you is that, as you look through the regulations, some of them are very specific. And when we look at the transcripts, sometimes the courses aren't easily discernible as to what they actually are, right?
Well,
So
I
we go
also,
through-
I'm not state certified. I'm Waldorf certified, but I've had public teaching experience. So it's really an unusual mix.
Right.
Yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll take a look and reach out to you specifically and give you the best guidance and the path of least resistance forward.
Thank you kindly. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
And then we have Rhonda Fortin, and she asks, is the additional literacy course based on the science of reading? We are finding new teachers are coming to us without the knowledge to teach phonics.
So let me just clarify this one. So in the old, I guess today it's still current until June 10th. In the existing expectations for the 020 elementary teacher, it had stated that there was a requirement of 3 semester hours in elementary reading methods. And then there was also a minimum of 3 semester hours from the following courses: children's literature, elementary language arts methods, or the writing process. So it was 6 altogether. They were listed separately, 3 and 3. The new language, and I'll copy and paste it into the chat so that you have that as well. It now reads, completed a minimum of 9 semester hours in elementary literacy methods, such as teaching reading, teaching writing, children's literature, writing process, foundations of literacy, or multicultural literacy. So that is the way that the new expectation is written.
Thank you. And for that, and then we have for Cynthia Alexander, she asks English for speakers of other languages. Was this just changed to teachers of multilingual languages?
No. So even though the identification for students is likely changing to multilingual learners, the title of the certificate was updated to English for speakers of other languages from, I think it was ESL. I could go back and check, Cynthia, to see what the old title was,
I
but
think you're right.
it's the 660. So whatever, hold on.
Yeah,
Maybe
it was
fine.
ESL. I just double
ESL,
checked.
yeah.
So it went from ESL to ESOL.
Then we have Jessica Greenberg. She says, does the new rule reflect everything in LD 1189?
It does, and more.
Great. Excellent. And then we have Teresa. She says, if someone working on a certification who has received a letter delineating what they need to do would like to have their file reevaluated under the new rule, would they need to pay again?
If they have not been issued any certificate, no. But if they've been issued a certificate and they would like to then get a different certificate, then they would have to.
Excellent. And then the last one we have is from Miriam. And she says, are the endorsements that will include the pre-K going to require 2 new requirements? Oops, somebody just posted something. There we go. 2 requirements plus early childhood coursework.
So it depends is the most accurate answer. The one certificate that does require additional early childhood coursework is the 282 birth to 5, which is not really even pre-K. The other certificates that went from being K to something to pre-K to something do have the diversity and development requirements, but there is not anything in addition for early childhood coursework.
And then our colleague, Professor Lawrence Stark from the University of Maine at Augusta, says a few of our students have asked about the process for adding a new credential under the new rules. Can they use the Praxis 2 to add a new credential, or would their transcripts be evaluated requiring additional coursework per pathway 2? Also, will students holding older certificate types run into issues applying for a new credential? The new language states B holds a valid Maine professional teaching certificate. And she will pre-K and K to 6, 5, 8, 6, 6 to 12, or pre-K 12, pre-K to 12 endorsement.
Okay, so
It's
if
an essay question.
so if one of your students, already has an endorsement. So a lot of times if a student goes to an EPP program, they're recommended and they receive one professional certificate. But a lot of times they also apply for other certificates and go through transcript analysis to meet those. So if your student is looking to add an endorsement and they apply before June 10th, they can use Praxis 2 as part of the requirement options. But if they apply after June 10th, then it would be obsolete under the new regulations. Okay, that was the answer to one of the questions. I think that might have actually answered a few of the different questions though. So even if you have a certificate, if you're trying to add a new one after June 10th, you would apply and fall under new regulations if you've never applied before.
Unless you meet one of the qualifications for people who get to choose.
Right.
And that's something we can also have more further questions. We can direct those in the office. Next one is from Stephanie's iPhone. And she says, can you please review the specifics of the 2 new courses required? Again, diversity and child development. What are some course titles that may qualify for that? If we have seniors who plan to student teach this year, I want to make sure that they meet these 2 requirements.
Okay, so what I will do is put into the chat the language. Just for reference, I'm still in the 020, so the letter that precedes it in the list of requirements will be G, but it may not always be G. Oh, it didn't even put the G. So we're good to go. So this is the diversity requirement that will appear for the certificates: 3 semester hours in diversity centered content, such as, and then you can see parenthetically, culturally responsive teaching, multicultural education, intercultural education, second language acquisition, or world language teacher methods. You will notice things like anthropology is not listed there because anthropology would not directly address today's classroom. So that's the list of possibilities for diversity. It would be hard for us, I don't want to speak for you, Stephanie, and your evaluators, but to rattle off names of courses at this moment because course titles vary from institution to institution, but these are the areas within which courses could come from. And then the second one is a little bit more straightforward. For the other requirement, it's 3 semester hours in human development, educational psychology, developmental psychology, adolescent psychology, or child development.
Great, thank you. And I think, I guess I would imagine that Stephanie's iPhone is from an EPP, and if she's thinking about those changes, if they recommend, we're good to go because it's also chapter 114. So those are the questions I have, Candace. Oh, 2 more just popped in here. Thank you. Oh, Stephanie, thank you. And that's it. So those are the last questions I have. And at this point, we still have a little bit of time for questions. But before we move forward, I just want to recognize that our chair of the State Board of Education has joined us, and that's Dr. Fern DeJarnes. So she is here, and I'm happy for her to be here with us because she was part of the 2-year 70+ meetings that we had to put this together.
Thank you, Angel.
Not only was Chair DeJarden's part of it, it is important to note that this actually is a rule of the state board, so they played a very, very active role. We have the honor of implementing it, but it is a state board rule, and we're happy for their participation engagement with us in improving Chapter 115. I am not seeing, although I'm not a host, so I'm not seeing any hands
Let me look at the other,
raised.
the other way. So I think if there's no more questions, we can give you about 15 minutes or 16. Yep, here's one. New rules indicate that they apply to school administrative units, private schools, CTE regionals. Let's see.
The answer to that is yes, because charter schools are SAUs, school administrative units. So they do.
Great. Thank you for that answer. And so with that, I just want to thank everybody for joining us this evening and for you having the confidence to ask questions. And we know this is a continual program, and Stephanie has put on that our next meeting is June the 8th at 5 p.m. And this is for the title is How to Best Support Educators. So if you have LCC folks that you're good friends with, please invite them to this, or any other individuals that you think would benefit from these seminars. That'd be great. And like Stephanie said earlier, and Dan, this session has been recorded, and it'll be uploaded in our website, so you can get more information and continue to do that. And please know that we've been working diligent. I know Stephanie and her team have been working diligently with our developer and trying to get things all ready to go, and then hopefully we'll move forward. And this is a very exciting time for all of us, because one of the primary reasons of this change, as you know, is to have the best educators in the classroom. And you represent that group. And so we're happy that everybody has continued to do that. So with that, I wish you a happy evening. And Stephanie and Dan, thank you for being here. Dr. Tjaras, thank you for participating. And I forgot to mention Deanna Dorn, also from Teacher Excellence, and DOE is here with us. So thank you for being part of that. So it's good to have colleagues in the audience to wish us well. So with that, thank you very much. Have a great evening, and we'll see you on June 8th. Bye.